Welcome to Canadian Times. This week in the news, Trudeau's new bail-in law will allow banks to confiscate your hard-earned deposits. Yes, to confiscate your money, not because you owe it, not because you have any debt, but simply if the bank needs money, they can take it from you. This is Trudeau's idea of protecting taxpayers. He changes the term government to taxpayers, and this is really about protecting the government and their funds. What is the bail-in? Well, it is an act of Parliament that has been put forward that's part of the federal budget. It was presented on March the 22nd, and it became law on June the 22nd. So it is now law, and part of this bail-in, this banking law, this section of the banking law, allows banks to confiscate your money if they're failing. Then they can simply apply to the government. The government then gives them permission to take the money out of your account and then give you in exchange shares in their failing bank. And this, unfortunately, is something that is now the law of Canada. It's no longer a budget, which is just an intentional document. It is now the law. Remember, this is called the bail-in. Remember, it's opposite to the bail-out. Remember in 2008 when the American housing crash hit, and the governments, not just in America, but Canada and around the world, they had to bail out banks. The government's giving billions, even trillions of dollars to banks. Well, this time they say they're going to reverse the process and allow banks to bail themselves in by simply going into the accounts of their depositors and taking that money. Yes, in this Bill 15 that is now law, Division 5, Section 39.2, and I show it to you on the screen, restructuring transactions. This is the section, conversion, and I'll read it to you. An order made under paragraph 39.131D gives the corporation, a bank, the power to convert or cause the federal member institution to convert in whole or in part by means of transactions or a series of transactions in one or more steps, the institution's shares and liabilities that are prescribed by the regulations made under subsection 10 into common shares. Now, let's dissect this law a bit, because that's all a mouthful, a lot of legal speak. But if you look at it very, very carefully and slowly, what this does is it gives the bank the power to convert in whole or in part. Convert what? According to the Governor and Council, who is the Prime Minister and Cabinet, they can convert the institution's shares and liabilities into common shares of that institution. Well, what is a bank's liability? Well, let's look at that definition. In fact, in 2013, the banks had $1.472 trillion in deposits from where? In checking accounts and non-checking accounts and fixed-term deposits from the general public. All this money is a liability or debt of the bank. Your deposits, when you put it into their account, they now owe that money back to you. That is their liability. If their bank runs into trouble, then they will simply turn your deposit funds into common shares into their failing bank. And you say, well, you know what, our banks are in great shape, so nothing can happen, so this is just smoke and mirrors. Well, there's a reason why they just made this law on June the 22nd, 2016, and the reason is this headline: Canada is in trouble. Yes, the federal government, the CRA ratings company, DBRS, they have now shifted the Canadian banks' ratings to negative. They say the outlook for the Canadian banks is negative. Why? Because of the bail-in regime. Moody's and Standard & Poor's, the international rating companies, they rated Canadian banks as negative. Why? Because of the bail-in regime. And then you look at the housing market of Canada that has just skyrocketed in this country, where banks, remember, they have over $1 trillion of mortgages in money that's owed to them in the housing market. Well, in May of 2016, the average price of a house in Toronto is $1.28 million. In Vancouver, it's $1.4 million. We've seen a 30% increase in 1 year, even though people's wages have not increased. Deutsche Bank of the world, they put out a headline that said that Canada's housing market is 63% overvalued. 63% overvalued. In fact, the Bank of Canada, they say themselves that the housing market across the country is 30% overvalued, not just in Toronto and in Vancouver, but across the country. The International Monetary Fund says that our housing industry is overheated, and they are calling for that there may be a risk of a hard landing. Goldman & Sachs, Citibank, the Bank of America, JP Morgan, they've all warned their clients that there is a bubble in Canada and it is about to burst. The CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, also a government entity, they have announced that Canadian house prices are overvalued by 35%. So what happens when house prices are overvalued? The banks give these massive $1 million plus mortgages. Then one day the housing crashes, and the end result is that the banks are in trouble. In fact, Canadians are not just awash in mortgage debt, but in personal debt. In fact, Canada's debt to disposable income ratio grew to 163%, setting a brand new record in this country. In fact, what is remarkable about this is that in 2007, when the U.S. was about to crash, their household income, their debt to disposable income ratio was less. It was 160%. This big crash is coming. The law has already been passed, and whoever is not protected by the CDIC, the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation, which protects up to $100,000, anybody who has anything more than that will be at the mercy of the Prime Minister, who can give in whole or in part all of your money to the bank. This is the law of today, and we must fight to stop it. So I ask you to go to bailin.ca. Bailin.ca. Learn about this yourself. Share it with your friends. Sign the petition. Call your member of parliament. Donate what you can so we can fight back against this, because we don't want the banks taking our money.